Wonderful. Welcome to Well Power Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. And so Dr. Nathan is joining me today, and we are here in Las Vegas for the Biohacking Congress. I want to remind everybody who's listening in today that there's a couple more congresses coming up, Biohacking Congress Boston, and also in Miami in the fall, and we'll be there to greet you. There's tons of speakers, really intelligent tech, people groundbreaking in the supplementation world, and that's why we're sitting here today to have this conversation. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to start out by sharing a little bit of your story with the listeners, with the audience, so we can see sort of the place from which you came, and weave ourselves into a conversation around nitric oxide and the human body and optimizing our wellness.
Got it. Well, I'm a small-town Texas boy. Grew up in Texas and went to the University of Texas at Austin. I got a bachelor's degree in biochemistry. From there, I tried to go work, but realized there wasn't a lot of demand for a biochemist with a bachelor's degree. So I knew I had to go on and further my education. So I then went to LSU School of Medicine in Shreveport, where I got a PhD in molecular and cellular physiology, and then trained up in Boston for, I think, 3 years, and then moved back to Texas and became a professor of molecular medicine at the University of Texas Medical School in Houston. And so that was in 2005, but I've spent my entire professional career studying nitric oxide. And we've made a number of discoveries, have several dozen issued patents. We've developed different product technologies in different categories. And so that's where we are today, and trying to, I think certainly biohacking is the future of medicine and wellness. I spent 20 years on, teaching in medical schools and training future physicians using that model. And I think it's clear that model does not work. We have to be proactive, and medicine today is reactive. And so that's the beauty of the biohacking, is people are becoming aware of things they can do to enhance their wellness and prevent sickness.
Yeah. Coming out of this age too, it's like really beautiful to see people have more autonomy and more just advocating for themselves. I think getting curious, right, about their health and their well-being, and what are the things that I can do, what are the easy reaches for me to move the needle in a decent range, right? What are the things I can adopt? Because the other thing that we see often is that people are adopting 400 things at once, and then they don't know what works, and then the end of one experiment just becomes too convoluted. It's also really hard to adhere to.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
It's very expensive. It takes a lot of discipline, and people are overwhelmed with information. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the information out there is not accurate. So my challenge in the nitric oxide field is to provide the proper education, information, and awareness around the science.
Yeah.
There's a lot of charlatans out there that pretend that they have science, but they really don't. And it leaves the consumer confused and then spending money on things that don't work. So
totally.
That's the problem with this. And so I think the beauty of our conversation is we can get the right information out to the right people. Yeah,
that's really important. And I think there's also, somebody out there has said, you can find some kind of science literature backup theory, something to support anything you say, to support anything you say, because there's always some anomaly or some, vertical of the literature that is like, okay, well, in that case, that could be, so that's what I'm going to use as my backup. And as I commonly use the word householders, but as householders or just general population of people who don't have a background in research, I do a lot of research, reading research and literature, and I don't have that background, and I've gotten better at it, but it's deciphering all of the components of it, and sometimes just reading a summary is not really giving you the full picture of what's gone on, so it's like diving deep, and having someone like you, so it's so helpful. So let's talk about nitric oxide. Just like first, let's lean into what it is in the body and why it's so important. The person who introduced me to sort of the concept of nitric oxide was Amy Killen, who talks a lot about sex and skin. So there are some amazing benefits for nitric oxide. But let's talk about what it is and benefits to the body.
Well, it's a signaling molecule. It's how cells in the body communicate with one another. The most, recognized effects of nitric oxide is a dilation of the blood vessels. Mm-hmm. So when nitric oxide is produced, it signals the smooth muscle around the blood vessels to dilate and relax. And then that opens up the blood vessels so you get more oxygen and nutrient delivery to downstream tissue. But it's also responsible for oxygen delivery. So everything we know about circulation and oxygen delivery is controlled by nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is what allows for oxygen to come off the hemoglobin molecule to oxygenate tissues. It's what's responsible for the mitochondrial conversion of oxygen into cellular energy, or ATP. So when you lose the ability to make nitric oxide, a lot of things go wrong. You get high blood pressure, you get sexual dysfunction, you get cognitive disorders.
And it sounds like it's a reduction in the ability for you to uptake oxygen as that number is
Well, that's
lower.
secondary. That's a consequence of reduced nitric oxide production.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a number of things that lead to insufficient nitric oxide production. The consequences of that is you get constricted blood vessels, you get decreased efficiency of oxygen utilization, you develop, we see it in COVID with the low oxygen saturation, you develop hypoxemia, you get end-organ failure, and you die.
Yeah.
That's really the sequence of events. So, and loss of nitric oxide is the earliest event in that whole sequence of events.
Wow. Yeah. And just like as a nerdy breath worker, can you just speak really, because I know it's a rabbit hole, but just a little bit deeper dive on nitric oxide's reaction with the hemoglobin molecule, that a gas exchange is happening.
Yeah.
Like, can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I do have breath workers that are like in this audience and listening,
Right.
and we're all learning, we all dive into the physiology, and I think you can probably explain it in a simple way.
Well, there's multiple effects of nitric oxide. It's called pleiotropic molecule, meaning that it has a number of different biological effects. So one is through the dilation of the blood vessels. It's called a vasodilator. But the other one that was only recognized probably since 2015 was when we breathe in air, we take up oxygen by hemoglobin, and then it's delivered on the arterial side of things, and then when it goes from the arterial to venous transit in the capillaries, it releases oxygen. So hemoglobin undergoes an allosteric shift, a change in structure. The oxygen comes off. But now we're realizing that you have to have nitric oxide bound to a single cysteine residue on hemoglobin. And then it's close to the heme iron where oxygen binds. And so with that nitric oxide being bound to cysteine, that allows for the delivery of oxygen. If nitric oxide is not bound to hemoglobin, oxygen does not come off.
Right. And it has to come off in order to exchange
it has
and get
to
in the
come off,
tissues.
yeah.
And okay,
So
cool.
you can have, for instance, like 98-99% oxygen saturation, the pulse oximeter, but systemically you're hypoxic because the oxygen isn't coming off.
But it's just
until
in the blood.
It's just stuck to the hemoglobin.
Yeah.
So until you restore the functionality of nitric oxide, you're never going to fully oxygenate. We see that in our COVID drug now with patients who develop hypoxemia from COVID.
Yeah.
You put them on a vent, give them supplemental oxygen, but yet their O2 sats don't improve.
Right.
We have to restore the production of nitric oxide for that oxygenation to occur.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's great. And it also just speaks to, it's like not to jump the gun, but I think this is going to speak to maybe a later part of, people who are high performing and people who are doing sport and all of that. Like it's really going to speak to that.
Your ability to generate nitric oxide predicts how well an athlete you are.
Yeah.
So if your body generates a lot of nitric oxide, you can perform at the top of your game. If you can't make nitric oxide, you can't perform.
Yeah. And so what I know about nitric oxide, which is less than you, is hopefully and thankfully, is, I talk a lot about nasal breathing and really like keeping our mouths closed and the nose knows, and that's where we create all the nitric oxide. Are there any other ways that the body is making, nitric oxide that we should be thinking about that are controllable? Let's call it that.
Well, there's two ways the body makes nitric oxide. The one is through an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase. That enzyme is found in the epithelial cells in the airway. It's also found in our endothelial cells, the cells that line the blood vessels. And when you activate that enzyme, as long as it's functional, it'll generate nitric oxide. The problem is, and that's why deep breathing works and can lower blood pressure, because if the enzyme is functional and you do the nose breathing, the nasal breathing, then it generates nitric oxide, dilates the pulmonary arteries, improves oxygen exchange, and can lower blood pressure. The problem is the older you get, the less functional that enzyme becomes. And so you can actually see this. You take young people, they do deep breathing, measure the nitric oxide coming out of their nasal airway. You can measure it. The older you get, the less you make. So the older patients can do the deep breathing, the nasal breathing, but until you restore the function of that enzyme, they're not going to make nitric oxide.
Right.
So that's in the blood vessels, we call that endothelial dysfunction. But if you have endothelial dysfunction, you have epithelial dysfunction. So we have to restore the function of that enzyme. And part of the technology that I've invented and patented restores the production of that nitric oxide synthase enzyme. So that's one, you have to fix that enzyme. But then number two, the other pathway is through diet. And it's primarily from inorganic nitrate that's found in green leafy vegetables. That when you consume plants, vegetables, 90 minutes after you consume that, it's concentrated in our salivary glands, and then the bacteria in our mouth reduce the nitrate to nitrite and nitric oxide. So now we can use diet and nutrition as a way to enhance nitric oxide production. But that's assuming you're not using mouthwash, it's assuming you're not using fluoride toothpaste, and it's assuming you're not using antacids.
Yeah,
because
that's an important thing, because lots of people are using that. And I know that Amy will talk about that sometimes too. Like, stop the mouthwash. We know you want fresh breath. So can you speak to the mouthwash and the fluoride and the antacid? Yep. Because biohackers are not really using those things, but it's so prevalent in all the products. Even when I just got a travel toothpaste to come here, I didn't notice on the back it was like with fluoride, and it's like, well, I think that was something that we used to, as kids. We thought fluoride was better than it was, or so can you speak to that, because it's in a lot of the things that we're using, or that many people are using.
So in order for this pathway to work, so humans don't have a nitrate reductase enzyme. So we're 100% dependent upon the bacteria. So each time we salivate, we're secreting nitrate in our saliva, and then during that resident time in the mouth, these facultative anaerobes are reducing nitrate to nitrite. Then when we swallow our saliva, provided their stomach acid production, that nitrite in the saliva becomes nitric oxide gas. So that nitric oxide in the lumen of the stomach enhances gastric mucosal blood flow, enhances nutrient absorption, kills things like H. pylori and E. coli or salmonella, something you may have in your food. So that's how it works. If you kill the bacteria with fluoride, for example, fluoride's an antiseptic, it's a neurotoxin, and it kills your thyroid. So we should not be exposed to fluoride. It's in our drinking water. I tell people you have to get a home purification system, take the fluoride out. And it's in our toothpaste. So you have to use a fluoride-free toothpaste. And then the other thing is, 200 million Americans wake up every morning and use mouthwash. 200 million Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. It's not coincidental.
Yeah.
We and others have published that if you use mouthwash, you see an increase in blood pressure. If you use mouthwash, you lose the protective benefits of exercise. So that's like the worst thing you can do. Because you're disrupting this normal ecology of the oral microbiome. Part of its job is to make nitric oxide.
Right, and it's antiseptic, so it's
that's right.
It's like it's killing all the good things we need.
That's right. It's killing the bad guys and killing the good guys. It's indiscriminately killing the bacteria.
Okay, good. So this is like a great tip. First thing to do is like, hey, let's stay away from the antacids, from the mouthwash, from the fluoride and the toothpaste.
That's right.
Read your labels, people.
That's right. And then the other problem is, 200 million prescriptions are written for antacids every year. That's not even counting the over-the-counter purchases. When you take antacids, it completely shuts down nitric oxide production. There was data several years ago showing that people who had been on antacids for 3 to 5 years had about a 40% higher incidence of heart attack and stroke. So antacids are like the worst thing you can take. It completely shuts down nitric oxide production, and it puts you at risk for heart attack and stroke.
Wow. Okay, you heard it here.
That's right.
Let's talk about the. I want to talk about this supplement, the supplementation of nitric oxide and these things that you've worked so hard to create to be able to get us all healthier and live longer, hopefully, right? That's the longevity piece is huge. So.
Live longer and better.
Yeah. So supplemental nitric oxide. Well, how did it get from your brain into the actual packaging that I see out there on the table?
Right. Well, in 20 years of research, we realized how the body makes nitric oxide, what goes wrong in people that can't make it, and then now we can fix it. And so that's how we kind of evolved to this product technology. But our whole thought was, in people that are sick, they can't make nitric oxide. So we have to fix that. So if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we have to do it for you. So years ago, we developed a nitric oxide, an orally disintegrating tablet that when you place it in your mouth, it slowly dissolves over time, and that generates nitric oxide gas. And it's absorbed in the buccal cavity. It's distributed throughout the body. So that's kind of the first product technology, and then we've created other products like a fermented beet product that can generate nitric oxide for sports performance. We developed a topical nitric oxide now for skincare and beauty.
I saw some of the magic that's happening with that as well, with really healing people from the outside in. So that was, and just what happened, you demonstrated it on your hand, and we saw like blood flow increase, and really just amazing to see that instantaneous change.
Yeah, so this is a product unlike any other in skincare and beauty, because people spend a lot of money on skincare and beauty and they don't know if it works. And a lot of these products are masking. They try to hide the fine lines and wrinkles or hide the blemishes, where what we do is just the opposite. We give nitric oxide that then allows the body to heal itself, to regenerate. So when you apply, it's a dual chamber. You apply one side from one chamber, one side from the, and when you mix them together, they generate nitric oxide gas. And then you can actually see the nitric oxide working. You can see it'll turn pink, which is indicative of increased blood flow to that area. And when you do that, you improve cellular turnover, you improve cellular regeneration, collagen deposition, you improve hydration, and the consequence of that is fine lines and wrinkles disappear, the blemishes go away, and you have nice, beautiful skin.
Yeah.
And people
and
like that.
It's in a society and a time where, look, I understand that there are some benefits of putting collagen in your coffee and having collagen in water, but in a time and day and age where the marketing hype on collagen for solving all the problems of aging or skincare is really, I think, for me, it's a really strong recommendation to the women that I work with to find the solutions that actually work. If you're spending $100 a month on collagen, you're like 75 of that is probably like thrown out the door, right?
No,
Your joints
right.
are healthy, you're getting some protein from that, but it's not the
problem is
miracle worker it's promoted as.
Yeah. Now, if you're taking it as a supplement, but you don't have adequate circulation or perfusion, then that collagen or the amino acids your body uses to make the collagen protein aren't going to get to where they need to go. They're not going to get to the outer dermis of the skin to make new collagen because there's a restriction in blood flow. So you have to open up the highway to deliver the goods to where you want to get them, and that's what nitric oxide does.
Yeah, and so when people are using this topically, they're using it for different parts of the body, not just the face, like just for acne, for scarring, for adhesions, for things that are, I saw there was a photo of someone who maybe had something removed and then to be able to kind of heal that area.
Yeah, so we're seeing good results with that. We actually got a drug application going in from my drug company called Nitric Oxide Innovation. So we're taking the topical to the next level for prescription drug application.
Yeah.
Because we're seeing, phenomenal results on wound healing, whether it's diabetic ulcers or pressure ulcers or surgical scars and surgical site infections. The topical nitric oxide is antibacterial, antimicrobial, and it gets blood flow and improves perfusion to that area. And to heal a wound, you got to kill the infection and get blood flow to it. And our nitric oxide does both of those.
Yeah, and is it something that people will put on at night? Because I saw the difference that happens on your hands. So you're not going to put it on and walk out the door because it's going to make a little change in your.
You'll
temporary.
See. Yeah, we call it the pink glow, so you can actually see the product working. But that hyperemic response will last for probably 3 or 4 minutes. So it's not a histamine response. There's no heat. There's no itching. It's not an allergic response.
Right.
It's just opening up blood vessels and perfusing that tissue. But we've got 4 published clinical trials, and the protocol on that was on a clean face, apply it in the morning and at night before you go to bed. And in 30 days, you see some pretty transformative changes.
Yeah, and what I loved about it was that it comes with this 2 different pump series, because I know that if it was a 1 pump model, it's like the nitric oxide isn't made in that moment.
That's right. It's
already
a gas.
Dissipated, so it wouldn't work. So like that to me was like this is everything it's got to be.
Well, the challenge for many companies, including a lot of drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, is nitric oxide's a gas in a normal atmospheric temperature and pressure. So how do you create a gas that's gone in less than a second? And so that's kind of the riddle we solved many years ago. Is we made a solid dose form of nitric oxide gas, and in the topical we've made kind of a serum-based form of nitric oxide gas only when you mix those 2 components together. So you've got a shelf-stable product that is only active when you mix them together.
Yeah, it's amazing. And if you were going to say to someone like the best nitric oxide protocol would be that they're supplementing with it orally, so getting it in their bodies, as well as using it topically if they have skin concerns, conditions,
That's
and
right.
Also, especially as we're aging, right, we're at less and less nitric oxide. This gives capacity for our skin to be rejuvenated and
That's right.
And all of those pieces.
I tell people you have to do 2 things to address nitric oxide production. Stop doing the things that disrupt it, fluoride, mouthwash, antacids, and then start doing the things that promote it. That's moderate physical exercise, it's eating more green leafy vegetables, infrared sauna, certain wavelengths of light, sunlight's the best source, and then when all else fails, take a supplement.
Yeah.
And we know how to do that.
Yeah, amazing. I want to, on the leafy green vegetable front, somebody's going to ask me this in a DM and say, what leafy green vegetables? Is it across the board? Is it like the darker the better?
Yeah. Well, on average, the darker the better. But here's what we've realized, and we published this, I think, in 2015. because we wanted to answer that question: how much broccoli or celery or spinach would I need to eat in a single serving to restore my nitric oxide production? And in this study, we went to New York, Raleigh, Dallas, Chicago, and Los Angeles and bought the same vegetables off the shelf from the same grocer, brought it back to the lab and analyzed it. And we found that there's as much as a 50-fold difference in the nitrate content of those vegetables. So if you lived in Dallas, you could eat 6 or 7 stalks of celery and get enough nitrate to lower your blood pressure. If you lived in New York, you'd have to eat 30 or 40 stalks of celery. Yeah. So it's regional differences. It's different around the different vegetables. It's
maybe even
different.
Seasonal.
It's seasonal.
Yes.
It depends on conventional versus organically grown vegetables. Organically grown vegetables have, on average, about 10 times less nitrate than conventional.
That's interesting.
So organic is good because you're not getting the herbicides or pesticides.
Right.
But organic vegetables are depleted in basic minerals because you need nitrogen to assimilate other minerals and vitamins into the plant. And because of restrictions on nitrogen-based fertilizers for organic label, these plants and organic vegetables are deficient in nitrogen, and they're deficient in many other minerals.
This is all super fascinating because it's like this is the way that we get to change the landscape of how we move forward. And also because I eat only organic vegetables, I'm very like anti-glyphosate and all that.
Yeah,
but
you
then
should be. Yep.
How do I mix we should be. And then how do I mix in the components of the things that I may be lacking? So
well, there's ways to do that. You know, if you're deficient in vitamin D, what do? You take vitamin D. If you're deficient in magnesium, you supplement magnesium. If you're deficient in nitrate or nitrite, then we can supplement that and give your body what it needs, which I would say is the equivalent of eating a 150-gram plate of spinach. Yeah. So it takes the guesswork out.
Yeah. You still need to eat some greens, people.
No, you
can supplement with nitric oxide. Everyone will be like, all right, we're all going carnivore. This is amazing. I want to be able to give everybody sort of the capacity to find you and find your products. So can you speak specifically about where they can find them? Can you get them online? Are they available in stores? And how they can follow you and get, more tied into the research and the miracle that you have created with these products.
Well, we're searchable, right?
Yeah. You're searchable, but this is what you said earlier, right? There's a lot of different people out there with different things that may not be as well backed, and so we want to make sure people are. I'm particular with my brands, with my podcast, as people know me, with the people that I'm sitting with. I want the smartest person in the room, I want the best coaches in the room, and I want people who have literature to back everything up, and that's why you're here too. So it's like I'm like particular with the brands people use for a reason, because sourcing is everything and knowledge is power.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So I have an educational website, drnathansbryan.com. We have do a monthly blog, try to give people some practical tips on things to enhance their nitric oxide. I got a 6-minute video on there that'll kind of explain to the lay consumer what nitric oxide is and what it does.
I'll put that in the show notes for sure. Okay, great.
And then I'm on Instagram, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, LinkedIn. But yeah, you can search me and find. Like I said, I have several dozen issued patents. We've got a number of products on the market through several different companies who've licensed my technology. The N101 serum from Pneuma nitric oxide has really been transformative, and I think will certainly change the way that skincare is managed over the next several decades, because we're getting to the root cause of aging skin, not just the aging heart or the aging brain, but the aging skin. And through nitric oxide, we can mitigate the effects of aging.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm going to list all of the products in the show notes. I'm going to make sure people are connected. I'm going to get on top of these products myself, and seeing me share them on social media at Warrior Woman Mode, at Wellpower Podcast. So I'm so thankful we could sit together today, have this important conversation, talk about nitric oxide that exists in the body and the best ways to supplement for a better, healthy future.
Well, let's do it again. The field is rapidly evolving.
Okay, awesome. I have one quick question before we wrap up, which is I always ask on Wellpower, which is, if you could go back and talk to your younger self, right? Let's just say under 18. Everybody's got a different age that they're like, I don't want to go back to my 12-year-old self. But under 18, and looking at the entire wonderful journey that you've taken thus far, and all the education, all the important things you brought to the world, and you could go back and give yourself some advice, maybe as if you were a younger listener in the world trying to say, how do I optimize my wellness? How do I build my willpower? What would be that piece of advice you'd go back and give yourself?
Well, looking back, it's certainly been a journey that I could never have planned. And so the advice would be stay the course. I say that the longer I live and the more I'm on this journey, the more I realized how little I had to do in this and how little input I put. So I think, God puts people in our lives at certain points for certain reasons that allow us to pivot and go down another journey that perhaps we never intended. But you got to stay true. You got to keep the faith and keep going, because no matter what journey you're on, there's always going to be obstacles. There's always going to be people telling you can't do it or it can't be done. And just stay the course, because God has a plan for us all and we all have a purpose.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm starting to believe that more and more in my life. It's sort of how I got to Austin, was saying, I know what my passion is, I know what my purpose is, and the universe is really navigating me in a way that's like, okay, Austin is next for you. And you just have to, and the more I trust it, and I imagine you've seen this as well, the more that I trust the universe, the more that my path opens up to me, and actually things come in much more of a flow state. So that's a really beautiful notion. I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, well, thanks for being on
Cool.
today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, ladies and gentlemen.